After the devastating Wallstreet crash in October 1929, not only the US economy went into turmoil, but the negative effects of the Great Depression spread to all corners of the world. My country, the Netherlands, was one of the countries that did not escape from this fate. Unemployment started to rise dramatically. Already in 1930, about 150,000 men out of a population of just over 7 million had become unemployed. In the following years, unemployment rose steeply to its peak level of 600,000 by 1935. Gradually, it then started to slightly decrease, although until the Second World War about 350,000 remained unemployed. The period of between 1934 and 1936 was thus named the Crisis Years in the Netherlands. Daily, rows of unemployed men would queue up in front of labor exchange bureaus, either to try to find very scarce jobs or to receive a stamp in their booklet to confirm their status of unemployment in order to receive dole money. In order to avoid people becoming too lazy to work, the government deliberately kept this dole money to a minimum, just enough to pay the rent and buy food. There was no money for clothes, sports and leisure activities. Huge parts of the Dutch economy fell to a standstill. In Rotterdam and other Dutch harbours, the immense Dutch fleet of barges laid still and went to rust. Many industries came to a halt as well. Of the working population, 1 in 4 men were on the dole for a year or even much longer. Especially the metal industry was hit the hardest, with 40% of its workforce becoming unemployed. The previous industrial strength of the Netherlands was no more. By the mid of the 1930s, the Dutch government decided to take action by introducing the Werkverschaffing labor provision scheme. It was deemed better for the country to put the unemployed to work on government-funded schemes, instead of hordes of men loitering around all day long doing nothing. As an incentive, payment was slightly better than remaining on the dole. One of the schemes was to redevelop farmland, especially around the picturesque town of Giethoorn, to revive neglected farmland. At the beginning of every week, trains filled with labourers would stop in the middle of nowhere to enable them to work on the land. Canals were dug to provide the needed irrigation and drainage for the new farmland. Dikes were constructed to improve the protection of the Dutch lowlands from the sea and river floods. In Amsterdam, a complete new forest area was constructed, the Amsterdamse Bos. A major project was started aimed at damping the Zuiderzee in order to create new agricultural land. Heavily meandering rivers were straightened by digging new connections to cut off extreme river bends. Also, the castle at Hoensbroek in the province of Limburg was restored. Young people received training to build up arts and crafts and construction skills. New, huge locks were built at IJmuiden in the Noordzee Canal that connects Amsterdam with the North Sea. Much earlier than countries like England, steam trains were replaced and the whole rail network electrified. Many new housing complexes were built, and shipbuilding was also on the rise. The more or less forced labour provision scheme was not without controversy. Left-wing Dutch politicians frequently attacked the government for not doing enough to get the country back on the rails and being too frugal in their spending. On the 10th of May 1940, the Netherlands entered the Second World War. At the time, the effects of the crisis years were still ongoing. 4 days later, the Netherlands already suffered its first major blow with the terrible bombardment of Rotterdam city centre by the Germans. Most of the old centre was destroyed, 800 people were killed, and 80,000 people became homeless. Subsequently, the Dutch government capitulated and the country went into a state of a war economy. Ironically, the war brought an end to the unemployment situation. By the end of 1940, Germany's Reichskommissar Seyss-Inquart proclaimed that he had succeeded in eradicating the unemployment situation. Many young Dutch people were deported to Germany as part of the Arbeidseinsatz scheme. The Netherlands fell back to basically become an agricultural economy, supplemented by war industry in support of the German war effort. Besides Rotterdam being destroyed, other parts of the Netherlands also got severely damaged, not in the last due to Allied forces attacks. In that respect, the bombardments of the Hague's Bezuiden Houtquarters in March 1945, due to an RAF navigation error, should be mentioned. Similarly, Nijmegen suffered a serious mistaken bombardment by the Americans on their way back from Germany on the 22nd of February 1944. Rotterdam was also bombed by the Americans in the so-called Forgotten Bombardment on the 31st of March 1943. And towards the end of the war in February 1945, the Wieringer Meer was deliberately flooded by the Germans. The province of Zeeland suffered a similar fate by being bombed by the Allied forces during September and October 1944 in an attempt to flush out the Germans. Rotterdam's industrious harbour no longer had a role of any significance to play, and towards the end of the war got largely destroyed by the Germans to stop the Allies using the harbour for invasion purposes. Nevertheless, with hindsight, it can be said that World War II did have the effect of being the turning point to restore the economy and the starting point for building the country's future prosperity. At the end of the war, the country was largely in ruins. Rotterdam's harbour was destroyed, large areas were flooded, and the Germans had looted the country to the bone. Thanks to the Marshall Plan, as George C. Marshall, European countries received financial aid from the US. Dutch Minister of Finance Piet Liefdink declared all existing currencies as invalid and issued a so-called Tientje van Liefdink to every Dutch citizen to help them get back on their feet during the first week of the Dutch government's money cleansing scheme. This scheme was also aimed at ending the black money market, as well as halting the tremendous inflation. During the war, the Germans had simply continued to print money to keep their economies afloat. Eventually, people were allowed to keep their pre-war savings, provided they could prove that these savings were not the result of activities during the war. After the war, the Dutch quickly started to pick up the pieces and to continue where they had to leave off when the war broke out. The Dutch railways were further expanded and the total electrification completed. The KLM with their Flying Dutchman program started to attract more customers for their wide network of airlines that served the whole world, not only to the old colonies in Indonesia and the West Indies. The vast network of canals received a more prominent role in the transportation of goods throughout the country. The damping of the Old Zuiderzee, now renamed IJsselmeer, was continued and expedited with the aim of regaining even more agricultural land from the sea, and with the construction of future new cities like Lelystad and Almere in mind. Thus, historic fishing grounds were turned into fertile farmland. Within 5 years after the war, the devastated harbour of Rotterdam was rebuilt, and more started to serve as Europe's most important gateway to the seas and oceans. Amsterdam's harbour also became more significant for the Dutch economy. Amsterdam's diamond industry also picked up where it left off before the war. Famous diamonds like the Koh-i-Noor were cut there. The Dutch mines in the province of Limburg provided important employment to that region. All over the Netherlands, industries were emerging and expanding like the steel industry, the fertilizer industry, the shoes industry in the province of North Brabant, and the production of nylon fibers. Since the beginning of World War II, the population has started to expand to reach nearly 10 million by the mid-1950s and was expected to grow by another 2 million before 1970. Thus, the Netherlands became one of the most densely populated countries in the world. Due to the extremely fertile soil, the Netherlands became an important producer and exporter of agricultural products, an important role that it has maintained until this day. Overall, it can be concluded that the Netherlands rose like a phoenix out of the ashes of the crisis years of the 1930s and the subsequent World War II. Who knows what would have happened if this war had not taken place and this mid-20th century Great Reset, to use a colloquial term, had not taken place. Fact is that this period forced a change upon a dwindling global economy and also taught people to count their blessings and to come together to pick up the pieces and to make more effort to continue to live in harmony. A lesson that we seem to be in urgent need to be repeated in our present day. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel